Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Unfiltered Tales Season 5, Episode 3. And like we promised last week, what we're going to return to as we continue to celebrate our history, our brothers and sisters, our African Americans, with, I forgot what I just told you, what I named it: honoring the past, celebrating the present, and inspiring the future. So we brought my Uncle Alex back. And how you doing today, Uncle Alex?
I am doing great, and I would like to welcome everyone this evening. So, I also would like to thank you again for giving me another opportunity to provide you with some historical information today. I am the co host of Missing Pages of History, radio talk show of Richmond, Virginia, produced and hosted by Mr. Lee Robinson. I invite you to listen to his other podcast, Africa on the Move, covering world history and current events. On the previous program, I talked about how our history is a struggle against evil. Tonight, on the eve of the State of the Union address, our history is in jeopardy of being erased as more Black or African American government employees, generals, and citizens are being removed and replaced to assume their narrative that we are mentally inferior and not capable of serving and being loyal to America. From even before the first War of Independence until this day, their bravery, intellect, nobleness, and efficiency to use their warrior instincts have turned the tide in many American battles that may have been lost. We cannot stand back and let those brothers and sisters' history of honor and sacrifice be rejected and humiliated so that the worst of America can revel in their ability to destroy their years of faithful service to America. So, on this solemn eve, I ask you to read the full transcript of the April 6, 1970 Time magazine interview with Ralph Ellison. What America would be like without blacks. It is a compelling article of a fantasy that always comes to the forefront of America when blacks or African Americans start seeking freedom, equality, civil rights, independence, liberty, and their pursuit of happiness. Every time the minorities or poor of this country have made an advance in knowledge, education, finances, art, and leadership, the wealthiest people of this country have found a way to divide them. And when they could not pit them against each other, they attacked them socially, financially, and through legislation. They would encourage white supremacists to burn their homes and successful businesses. They would falsely jail them without warrant or cause out of jealousy and fear. They passed legislation, most notably known as the Jim Crow laws, against their social progress. They brutally beat and killed them through all manners of torment and proclaimed that this was their American right to do so. We as a people have been in a struggle against evil and hate in America since the first Africans came to these shores. So many blacks have become passive and complacent with the kind of abuse of their rights and freedoms that they no longer want to protest or boycott the ones who are doing them harm. As Dr. King said, I can remember when Negroes were just going around, and as Ralph has said, so often scratching where they don't itch and laughing where they are not tickled. But the day is over. We mean business now, and we are determined to gain our rightful place in God's world. Must not let evil men remove us from history. It is a shame and disgrace to our ancestors who died defending their rights as human beings. Our future generations depend on standing together in this moment of an international crisis for the Black or African. We must continue to secure our true greatness in world history while others try to remove our achievements from reality. This is the true meaning of Mr. Ellison's book, The Invisible Man, published in 1952, which was considered by white society as a masterpiece, a superb book, and the most impressive work of fiction by American Negro which they had ever read. It was Ralph Ellison's first novel and the only book published during his lifetime. Sometimes greatness only needs to be acknowledged once. If the society ones live in is honest in the fellowship of mankind. And going back to that time interview, because it is so complete on what we will go through tonight.
Hmm.
In 1970, you're 2 years away from Dr. King being assassinated. And the laws of the Civil Rights Acts were actively being enforced. Because even though they were passed in 63, 64, and 65, 66, it sometimes takes 2 to 3 years for those laws to be implemented. And then sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years for them to be enforced, just like we honor Juneteenth. It
Right.
took 2 years, for the troops to get to Texas to enforce the proclamation.
Right.
So
They were the
you
last
got
ones that
always,
were left. Everybody else was gone.
yes. And so, General Granger was less than 30 minutes away, from Texas,
Right.
Vicksburg, Mississippi. All he had to do was cross the river. But in not doing so, it took 2 more years, for us to realize freedom in Texas. So if it is not, the federal government do not step in and do what they're supposed to do, then that particular area of the country does basically what it wants. We go back to a thing called states' rights, and a lot of state legislators have not approved, let's say, like Black History Month, Dr. Martin Luther King's holiday.
Arizona.
Yes. So even though it is a national law, which is supposed to be honored in all 50 states and territories, if there's nobody there to enforce it, then it doesn't mean that any state can honor it. So there would be no Black history in any state, no celebration of Juneteenth in any state, no Dr. Martin Luther King in any state or territory, unless it is enforced first by the federal government and then passed down, to be implemented by the state government. So I was so glad to have an opportunity when the Dr. King holiday was honored here in North Carolina and happened to be right there in the building when it was signed as a holiday. So those are the things, and it had been maybe 5 years, 6 years, already where other states had approved it. But it took us 5 or 6 years, to go ahead and say, hey, we're gonna, honor this as a federal holiday. So that's what we have to look at in our society. We always on the tail end of things. It doesn't
Right.
happen right away.
Right. So we go back to what you was discussing about, that Time magazine article with Dr. Ralph Ellison, basically how he highlighted the importance of, black artistic expression, particularly jazz and blues and literature as a central element of American culture. So he pointed out, imagine a country without no black people, from economy to its morals. Uh, the country would struggle. It would be
Yes,
unrecognizable. No
yes,
soul, no energy, no defined intentions.
yes. You know, we have a problem in Black American history where it is not taught how valuable you are. If you don't have the teachers and the teachers that are willing to implement Black history, then Black culture becomes invisible, as he also wrote The Invisible Man.
Right.
Because really, the article was sort of pointing to how the Black man in this country would one day maybe become invisible and he would lose the cultural gains he had made
Well,
coming from Africa.
Uncle Al, that's kind of hard because I want to quote, especially what you just said, become invisible. But to quote Rest His Soul Paul Mooney, when he said
Yeah,
everybody want to be a nigga, but nobody want to be a nigga.
right. Yeah.
So it's kind of hard for us to be invisible and be invincible when we are basically the standard. We make what's cool, what's not the culture. Our whole culture is basically worldwide. Our culture is in everything, whether we talk in music to movies to literature to whatever.
Well, you have whites that want you make you invisible. Not the black race itself. White people
Right,
want to enjoy the music. Okay, they
right.
want to come out with groups, say, just like with Jackson Five, where we had the Osmonds. Okay,
Hmm.
so now we got Korean groups, doing K-pop, and different things. So yeah, we're being implement. I say duplicated or cloned, in other cultures.
Can be
I
duplicated
dance.
but never replicated.
Oh yeah.
That's plain and simple. We can be
Without a
duplicated
doubt.
but never replicated.
Yeah, because everyone loves our culture. They love your swing.
Right.
Yeah, there would be no jazz today. Without us. There would be no banjo. Without us. We brought the string instrument over, the horns, the drums. So many things that are in our culture that it makes a difference. Hip hop today would not be as big as it was, go go and different things like that. It's enjoyed all over the world. Okay,
Right.
hip hop just took the world by storm. It almost shut R&B down, jazz and everything else.
Right.
So, but then you have all these, white artists that
Hmm.
came behind and decided to do the same thing we were doing. And one of those most famous ones, Vanilla Ice, if you remember that years ago,
Yeah,
when
that was
Vanilla Ice came
that
out.
was one hit song in 1990. And that was like the big, like it was him versus him, and it wasn't even about the
Yeah,
music, it was about dancing.
right.
So
Well,
I mean,
then you had other groups, okay, and
yeah,
other singers.
you had the Beastie Boys back in the 80s with competing
Oh
with
yeah,
Run DMC. You had those.
yeah, and you had
I mean, they have they pioneers from in our culture that break
oh yeah,
through, but
oh yeah. And if it wasn't for Don Cornelius giving David Bowie and different ones that opportunity on Soul Train, so we could see
right.
what the other side was like. Tina Marie, different
Hmm.
ones to come on the show and
Blue Eyed
blow.
Soul.
Yeah, oh yeah. So if it wasn't for him, because Don, for 30, 40 years there, had a very serious show, with Soul Train, and
Right.
that did a lot to implement how black people was. His main focus was to make sure that the African American just wasn't seen as a looter, at that time,
Hmm.
somebody was going to break in your house and steal, or someone on the news in handcuffs, what the police had all the time. So he wanted to
Hmm.
change that image, of young African, American males, and show their talent, that through dance and through music, and that was a way to bridge one gap. He
Hmm.
wasn't trying to put say financial guys on TV, which he could have, like Reginald Lewis, from
Hmm.
Baltimore there, the first
Hmm.
black millionaire. So
Reggie
he
Lewis
could
at
have,
the museum.
right, he could have brought Barry Gordy on there, different ones,
Right.
to say, hey, this is where we need to be. So he held back on that end of the wealth, and then, like I said, basketball players, football players at that time who were making good sums of money. So, but he didn't bring them forth, and he thought the bridge to say white America would be our music, and our culture, and
Hmm.
maybe if we could get them to like that, because they like Nat King Cole, okay, they like Ray Charles. So if we can get them, into our music, and they say, "Oh, okay, well everything's all right." Elvis was highly rejected, and look at how many black artists Elvis Presley, patent his music and his style after, and they
Right.
wouldn't even show him from the hips down because of
Right.
what all that black movement. At that time they said he was doing.
Right.
So they wouldn't even show him from the hips down. But Elvis, what he went into churches, he went in different events, where Little Richard was and a bunch of others, and copied their styles, and put it in his show. So that is what we have to look at. We are often, like you said, copied a lot, and it makes a difference if you not only copy our style, but you also copy what we contribute to America.
Right.
That's the big problem. We climb to a certain amount material wise and money wise, and then someone gets nervous, someone gets jealous, and
Right.
that's the problem. Right there. We have to know our place, in other words, in this society, and that was another thing that he was talking about, knowing our place, in this society. But to us, we should not have a place. If this is America, land of the free and equal opportunity, and different things, we should not have to worry about a civil rights bill, a voting rights
Right.
bill. Those things should be irrelevant. But they
Hmm.
have to, be there to protect us, because otherwise, those little simple freedoms that they enjoy all the time are a big deal, to us, in
Well,
doing so. And
well,
we
what's
need to
still
go, yeah,
no, no. I just want to say this. What still amazes me sometimes is that even though after 500 years, 400 years, and you stand today in 2025, and last year 2024, there's always something coming up. The first black person to do, and it's like, hold
yeah.
on, what? Like,
Yes, and that's again what Mr. Ellison was talking about. From the first black Negro, ball player, basketball player, football, the boxer, whatever. We should never say been at that point if we're all
right.
Americans, in this country. So America should, just like the Olympics. There was a lot of blowback, say from certain people, because so many black athletes were winning medals this year. Isn't that a
Hmm.
good thing? you know that that you can feel a team with so many blacks on it that they're gonna win, and to have blowback against a gymnast who proved herself, perhaps the best American gymnast ever, and you're gonna have blowback against her. You're gonna have blowback against
Right.
LeBron James, because of the way he walked out with the flag. I mean, how many different ways
Hmm.
can you wave it and hold it? that don't make
Correct.
sense. Not at all. That
Well,
basketball team
you
has been awesome. Our Olympic basketball team has been awesome.
right. I mean, you're much older than I am, and you were there to probably witness Tommy Smith and John Carlos
Oh yes,
of what
definitely,
they did in
definitely.
1968 at the
Yes.
Mexico City Olympics,
Oh yes, without a
and
doubt.
how that, well, me just hearing the stories of how once they, did they fist, how it blew back on them and changed their life completely the opposite way from them when they came
Oh
back.
oh yes. No Wheaties boxes for them. Oh, okay. You forget that. And
Right.
that is America's biggest problem. As an athlete, you're supposed to respect the country and say walk a tightrope of
Hmm.
emotions. But in the moment, our displays of defiance to a system that has constantly harmed someone else, just like Kaepernick taking the knee over
Right.
police brutality. Okay,
Hmm.
everything that he did in that moment was a good sign,
Hmm.
but it was negatively received, by
Right.
white society. You know,
Hmm.
for you would think for police brutality, everyone would be joined taking the knee, for it. But no, we got people in society out here who they look at giving police a pass when they do wrong, and they don't want to see them persecuted, going to court. There was a executive order, signed a few days ago that will not hold, certain police officers, accountable.
Right.
And that was because of George Floyd situation. Now, all of us know about those 9 minutes and 23 seconds, okay?
Right.
And the parties who were involved should go to jail, regardless what. Well,
Hmm.
it's not only that situation. Ahmaud Arbery or
Hmm.
Mr. Brown that I went to Elizabeth City, and had an opportunity to go there. When you go those places, Eric Gardner. and
Right.
Mr. Brown that was killed in St. Louis.
St. Louis.
Yeah, when you go to these different places and see these communities, and you know where these gentlemen came out of, some of them were hardworking fathers,
Right.
and they were doing things for the community as far as contributing from a job or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But to have their lives cut short just because they did not follow perhaps 100%, to an entanglement order, from an officer, put it that way. When you say hands up, you put your hands up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you don't put your hands up the right way, you might get shot. You put your hands down, don't put your hands down the right way, you might get shot. What is a person, supposed to do?
Right.
I understand the heat of the moment on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking me to do something, but you have to be clear and precise in what you're telling me to do. Not shouting, not hollering at me, not screaming at me, but just saying, what needs to be done, and then, if any flicker of light and there's a possibility of a weapon,
Mm-hmm.
then there's gunfire.
Like
The
Tamir Goodman.
yeah, the guy in New York, Diablo, the one that was shot, what, 61 times, 60
Yeah,
sometimes?
yeah. You had
At his organ.
Diallo.
Yeah, just
You
pulling
have
out his
Gardner
wallet.
selling cigarettes.
Yeah. And that was happening in Ellison's time. And also Haynes were happening at his time.
Mm-hmm.
Because, we got to remember now, the country, we just signed in 2018 the hanging law, which made it a hate crime. Whereas Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, and I think Maxine Waters, if I'm not mistaken, helped bring that bill forward so
Okay.
that when African Americans are hung in this country, by anybody, they can be prosecuted. Because they were basically a law on the books almost that you couldn't even prosecute someone for putting a rope around African American's neck and killing him. So
Right.
many lynchings have happened in this country. They say about 5, 6, 7, 8,000. Um, some say 10,000. Some say 20,000. Some even go as high as 60, 80,000.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's probably closer to 100,000 almost. And then
Mm-hmm.
and people say, well, why did it, go that far? As far as 100,000. Well, it wasn't so much of how valuable the property was. They wanted to set an example, out of you. Uh, there were plenty women on the plantation
Mm-hmm.
that were having babies. And with those that new influx and master out there, raping slaves and all. So, there was a constant supply, of manpower. Well, it might not, neutralize till about 10, 15 years, but still there was a constant supply. But the main thing was to make sure that we were compliant, to what
Mm-hmm.
they were doing. And so a lot of us, because and especially ones that ran, once or two
Mm-hmm.
times running, they didn't caught you, they got to set an example. They had no qualm when Nat Turner did what he did, and then they killed what 10, 15, 20, 30 others that weren't even
Right.
involved or whatever, but
Well,
just to make an example.
I'm glad you bring him up, Nat Turner, because the thing is this: like you said earlier, to bring it to correlate together, you said earlier about Black history being taught.
Yes,
They only in public schools, whatever school you go to, private, parochial, whatever, they only give you the notables.
yes.
And why is that they only give you the notables?
Well, they only want to give you the notables because they don't want you to know about Washington's Black Regiment. Okay. They
Okay.
don't want you to know about the gentleman that was with Lewis and Clark on the expedition. They don't
Okay.
want you to know about the black tanker unit that Patton had in World War II. They didn't want you to know about the different Buffalo soldiers and how they went out west and helped round up the Indians and brought them to the reservations for them. So
Hmm.
your history is so important to them as a workhorse for the nation. Building the buildings, Congress, the White House, and everything. You are more there to do the labor, but
Right.
not to get the recognition. In other words, it's like any company that owns, very seldom you may have one employee. Say Amazon, they have an employee of the year.
Right.
Okay, they don't gratify every employee they got. They
Right.
got to think how they call the employee of the year, and
Right.
so that person gets all the recognition. But look how many employees Amazon has.
Right.
So the
Because
history is the same way.
I never understood certain why why Haiti had got so much backlash until I had a Haitian on the show last year for Haitian Revolution, and he explained it to me. It was like because they fought back and won. That's the
Yes,
reason why.
yes.
Nobody really. That's why they paint Haiti in a bad light
Oh yeah.
because they fought back and won.
And they do that today. That's why, a statement was made about they eating the dogs and the cats, which
Right.
was totally untrue. Okay, totally untrue. But yet and still, it was repeated over and over again and doubled down on that this
Hmm.
was a correct statement, but it was never true at all. And even when evidence, when the lady found the cat, you
Right.
know, and still nobody wanted to say, oh, we made a mistake. So the history that we have in our books, if you open them up, our
Hmm.
American history books, I would take maybe 40 to 50% of it being true and the other half not being true and incomplete. And the reason why is because you have a lot of that history of this country. It would not be a country without African Americans, without Native Americans, without Chinese Americans, without Japanese Americans, you know, or Mexican Americans. This would not be a country what it is. But you don't want to give those groups acknowledgement because then it takes away from the ones who were privileged at the top. So
Hmm.
you always want to make sure that the privileged ones are the ones in the light, not the ones that's out there doing the heavy lifting. Put it that way. When cotton was king, that means somebody was out in that field getting it, picking it, putting it
Right.
in bales, putting it on the ships and all. But the sellers of that cotton were the ones that were being recognized. Those ones got the big paychecks. The ones out there in the field picking cotton won't get anything. So that's what we have to look at. Our history has been so distorted, and our teachers went along with that plan because they did not want you to feel that great about yourself. Because remember now, if you have history to back up everything about you, then
Hmm.
that puts you in a different light. It was all about who your family came from and who you were.
Right.
And if you were not part of the elite, we also had a black elite in this country. So let's don't forget, about the black elite. And these black elites loaned money not only to the Continental Congress, for the war effort, for the Revolutionary War, but
Hmm.
uh, they did a lot of things, in this country, because they paid a lot of taxes and they ran businesses and everything. So our black elite, has always been out there, and they gave quite a bit of money for the, say, the Underground Railroad to make sure that blacks got, away. And if they were found out, they were murdered and killed, in doing so. But there were a lot of black um, prominent families, and Harriet Tubman, for the rest of the remainder of her life, she had that school, that she had, on her estate that continued, to teach and help blacks, get ahead. And that was the thing, if they escaped and got to the north, um, they tried to make sure that they helped others,
Right.
leave the South and also get an education. Because once you could read and write, it was harder to be enslaved again. So as long as
Hmm.
you couldn't read and write, you could easily be manipulated. But once you were able, that's the reason why they didn't want us educated. Because they knew if we could read and write, then we would know the law. And by what the law was saying, it was against what they were doing. So they had to keep us dumb, and that's why America didn't have schoolhouses for so long, for the almost 200 years in this country. We had these little one-room schoolhouses, public education, our oldest public school, 1895, UNC Chapel Hill. So they wanted to keep the public dumb. Now,
Mm-hmm.
Yale, Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, and all of them, yeah, you can go there, but look at the money that you would have to take to go there.
You priced
So,
out.
right, yeah, we priced out heavily. And only the wealthy sons, went there, became lawyers, and they became future Supreme Court justices and presidents and everything. But even with all of that, we have to realize that, again, they weren't the smartest, people in the nation, even going to Harvard and Yale. So you still had a whole class of individuals that were subpar, that were leading our government. But they wanted to make sure that the riches and the wealth of this nation stayed with that 1 to 10% and not with the lower class. That's why they didn't want a public education system, even though the Constitution called for one.
Mm-hmm.
They did not want one because they did not want to educate the middle class or the poor. They wanted to keep them as dumb as possible, keep it paying taxes, committing themselves, on the battlefields, whatever war we might get into, and also to keep the factories running, agriculture going, and stuff like that. So the country itself was willing to give land, through the Homestead Acts and different things like that, opening up the West. And as long as man went out there and farmed, but how many farmers were well educated?
Right.
Very few were well educated. So one of the biggest things that when we look at all these red states and we look at the educational value from those red states, and we'll probably find the most lowest, and I hate to use that term as they say IQs, but we will probably find some of the lowest IQs in the nation in all those red states. Now look at the blue states. They are
Mm-hmm.
wealthy states that take care of the red states.
Right.
So that means that biodiversity, where they have many cultures coming together, they know how to continue their money, rolling. And they don't have to depend on the government with all those subsidies and different programs, to keep them floating. So it's uh it's something to me that I look at and I say we have been duplicated so much, not only in our skills of building, because
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing that we came here for, agriculture. We came here for that's another big one, agriculture. Growing crops and different things. Yeah, we know all about the fields, but also we have to look at medicine. Well, we might have any kind of outbreak now, whatever, but we got to realize first outbreak in this country of smallpox. Well, what
Mm-hmm.
one of the Africans introduced George Washington to the vaccination, and he vaccinated his troops. If George Washington believed in this man many years ago, trusted him, why do our society today fringes on vaccination? Now, we know that females, for I think it was Pfizer, the doctor, and I think also with Johnson and Johnson and Moderna. So once you have African Americans working on stuff, and by the way, Cuba is just unbelievable with its labs, okay, and everything, the technology in Cuba for medicine. But yet and still, the United States shuns Cuba. Again, that's a nation of color, just like Haiti. They wanted independence and they didn't want to be part of the United States. So it is just great that the Haitians, looked at themselves and said, we are going to be independent of France, of Britain, of Spain, of the United States. We don't care who it is. We're going to run our own country. And for the whites here in America back in the 1800s, that was the most fearsome thing in the South because they thought that they would take over here. and they would eventually get their own part of the United States, carve out. Now, with the intentions, also, Ellison was talking about Marcus Garvey and the Back to Africa, movement, and where Lincoln also gave into the idea of moving African slaves back to Africa. That is also part of that fantasy plan, and also part of a plan that a lot of Africans or African Americans, should visit the homeland. We should
Right.
network with Africa, and we should network with Algiers and Libya and Mali and Niger and Cameroon and Sudan and different countries and the Congo. We should be trading back with them, African American companies here. We have to build that wealth both ways between them and us. And as long as we are separated, then our dollars separated.
Right.
And we mentally, we look down on each other. A lot of blacks look down on Africans. Africans look down on blacks, which is crazy. But it's the same thing that goes on with the Dominican Republic.
And
Haiti,
Haitians.
Dominican, yeah, it's right there on the same island. It's just that what light skinned blacks, dark skinned blacks. Okay, they claimed on the Dominican side about 52% of their white heritage. Okay,
Hmm.
so but and so they want to be recognized as European. So they wouldn't even join in the fight with Haiti. That whole island, could have been just like Cuba. Isn't that
Right.
something? But they couldn't get them, as we were talking about last time, about the house Negroes and the field Negroes. Yeah,
Right.
they couldn't get those house Negroes, to go ahead and join with them. And they could have had the whole island. Just think today of the economy of Haiti and Dominican Republic if it was one island. You see what I'm saying? One country, not two,
Right.
just one country. Then they may have spread that to Costa Rica. They may have spread that to Puerto Rico. That independence, Jamaica, that independence that we
Hmm.
don't have to rely on nobody else. We could have had probably 10, 15, 20 uh, African nations in the Caribbean there, from and had good trading partners, with Africa because they do, trade and with Venezuela and with Brazil and different areas. Because remember, there more slaves went to Brazil than did the United States. So in that trading process, if they were
Hmm.
able, get along with each other, it would have been a wonderful thing. But the United States never wanted South America to be anything. That's why they continue to threaten Mexico. They continue to threaten Canada. We want to be the big dog on the porch. Okay. And we want everybody up under us. But yet and still, there are more countries, surrounding us right here in this hemisphere.
Hmm.
And we should be afraid of them. Not them afraid of us, but we should be afraid of them. But we
Correct.
don't, yeah, we don't treat them as equals. Look how large Mexico is. You don't treat them as equal. Look at Canada. Talking about making them the 51st state. We're not treating them as equal. So we're
Mm.
looking down, on them. And we should have more respect for our neighbors because, again, those African slaves that went to Venezuela, that went to Honduras, that went to Nicaragua, that went to Colombia, they went all over and they are our family. So it's not just Africa. We have a lot of family south of the border. One of Mexico's first presidents was what? African American. Look him up.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So how many
So.
how many yeah, how many Mexicans want to say, this guy, if we would still be up under Spanish control, had this gentleman not saw that Mexico needed to be free. Isn't that something?
Correct.
Yeah. So
Correct.
there's a lot of hidden history. Like I say, I never knew that Mexico had an African American, an African Spanish president. Never knew it. So didn't
Mm.
know that he won Mexican independence. So those are things. that we're not taught. In Brazil, yeah, same thing. In other countries, same thing. But we're not taught that. They're not taught that. Their own
Right.
history. So if nobody teaches their history, their culture, then everybody else, all the rest of us, we out here fighting each other. You know, I read a article years ago. It was in Compton. It was about when the Boys in the Hood came out, and it about these gang guys got into a fight and shot each other. Where they both lived, and they put them in the same hospital room together. Isn't that
Mm,
something? Bloods and the Crips,
mm,
and they put them both in the hospital room. Well, they were shot up so bad until they couldn't get out of bed to get at each other. But in the 2 weeks that they spent there in the hospital, they became friends. But they
right.
never knew that they even were family. So these guys, they were actually cousins. But
Mm,
on the street, they were trying to take each other out because they didn't
right.
know their history, who they were. Isn't that something?
Right. That's something. But we're gonna
Yeah.
go back to wrap it up. Like we started at the
Okay.
beginning with 1970 with Ralph Ellison's Uh, Time article. Basically, he argued that America without black people would be unrecognizable, as black
Yes.
culture, labor, struggle are inseparable from the nation's identity, shaping
Yes.
its language, music, democracy, and moral progress.
Yes.
So overall, that's what Dr. Ellison told us in his 1970 Time magazine article. But thank you for coming again, Unc. For
Yeah.
they wanted you back, so I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure when I get off here, they're gonna want you back again for part 3. So,
Okay.
are you shooting this weekend?
No, I'm, gonna be chilling. Put it that
Okay,
way. This weekend I'm gonna have a lot to do tomorrow. Once tonight's State of the Union,
right. And that's why I
and
don't want to hold you because I know you got to get to that.
yes, without a doubt. So I got to give a lot of comments tomorrow
Right.
on what the craziness that what may come out.
It's on
So
YouTube, right?
yeah,
So get
and
to
so
Roland Martin's YouTube page if you not if you
yes,
guys that's watching don't know what's going on about the State of the Union with Roland Martin them having something tonight on YouTube.
yes, and Roland uh, is a wonderful platform, but also the Defiant Lawyers. So that's another one to check out, the Defiant Lawyers. So, but we have a lot of streams tonight. Reverend Barber, I do believe, is going to give us a good message. Regardless what. And we have other civil rights, other activists, and different ones who will add to the content and say sort through the information or misinformation that we may be told in the morning. So we have to make sure that we, as a people, continue with our own plan.
Right.
We have always been followed the leader in this country, okay, and
Mm,
it's time now that we no longer, like Malcolm X say, we we got to move forward.
right.
We keep taking two steps backwards, one step forward and two steps backwards. It's time for us to just keep climbing the ladder and not, being knocked back down, on those rungs. It's too many people. We have too much money, in our pocketbooks not to get together and start networking, bringing together businesses, supporting our HBCUs, supporting our black businesses, not making it a nationalist thing, but just making it a common sense thing of what we should do as a people to continue on. So
Yeah.
I have enjoyed myself tonight, and I can't wait to meet talk to you again.
All right. So, this has been tonight's episode. We'll be back tomorrow with Pepper Cat tomorrow. She went from the newsroom to adult entertainment. So this should be a little crazy tomorrow. So if you're joining me tomorrow, 7 p.m., same time, Unfiltered Tales. Pepper Cat's coming from how she was a news producer and how she joined the adult entertainment business. So I'll see you tomorrow evening, same time, same channel, same place, 7 p.m. Unfiltered Tales. You can watch the rerun of this video as soon as we exit. But if you want to listen to the audio, it should be out tomorrow afternoon. Yeah, I'll probably put out tomorrow afternoon.
Great.
So thank you again, Unc, for coming by.
And thank you for inviting me. And have a
All right.
wonderful evening.
All right.